Welcome to my channel, You and Your Forces, an audiobook by Elizabeth Towne. Chapter 1. Genesis. Is there any individual who has developed intelligence enough to be able to read these lessons, who needs to be shown by processes of reason that there is a single unitary cause behind the visible universe? Then let him seek first the scientist and the theologian, the natural scientist, with the telescope and the microscope, the hammer and the scalpel of the geologist, has traversed his tedious path to the very limits of the realm of causation. The religious with the eye of faith has glimpsed it. Neither needs proof that it exists, but who has probed, measured, or understood it? Here the scalpel, the microscope, and the eye of faith are equally useless. Only reason, with the things that are seen as premises, can find a satisfactory answer. Reason strips the universe of all form, stands in the place of the first cause, and then carefully reconstructs within itself the all. After cleansing the universe of all forms, reason proceeds to take stock before rebuilding. And, lo and behold, it discovers nothing but itself to do the work, and nothing but itself to build. It also discovers that what it believed to be its nature, reason, has also disappeared, since reason depends on experience to exist. Thus she comes to the conclusion that, although she is potentially the whole universe, in the beginning, she was omnipresent mind, with no experience from which to reason, therefore aware only that I am. Thus we come to the conclusion that the original energy, or cause, is mind, in which all things are, from which all are constructed and by which all are held together. All is mind. Matter itself is mind. Pending further knowledge, I am inclined to believe that the nebular hypothesis of creation is correct as far as it goes. It is reasonable. But right or wrong, it will serve to illustrate the processes by which mind creates form. Imagine all matter dissolved and diffused equally through space as a gaseous vapor. Think of this vast, empty, yet full space as inexperienced mind. Mind unconscious of anything other than itself, I am. A gaseous vapor is matter, or mind, at a very high rate of vibration. Matter is atomic, says the scientist. There is only matter. Ask him what an atom is, and he will tell you that it is a kind of little whirlwind in the ether, an infinitesimal cyclone of infinite speed. What is that which spins at such infinite and minute speed? The mind, the mind, the mind. What is the mind? Everything and nothing. Mind is the first cause. If you are not satisfied with that, look for more. Imagine these little cyclones scattered through space, each a tiny point of consciousness in mind, nothing more. Have you ever stood beside a moving train and felt the suction of its motion? Each of these tiny atoms would have a suction, an attraction, for anything that came within the circle of its influence. It is as unlikely for two atoms to move at exactly the same speed as it is for two people or two leaves to be exactly the same. The atom with the fastest speed, the most alive atom, would have the strongest suction or attraction. The others would be negative to it, that is, influenced by it. For this reason, the more active small cyclones would attract the less active ones, which would catch the faster moving speed, acting at the same time as a brake on the action of the positive atoms, thus bringing them to a point of vibration in sympathy with each other. As in response to the attraction, they draw closer together, each becomes conscious of the other. All consciousness is presumably caused by this friction. Gradually, as they become accustomed to this, each becomes unconscious of the other, just as we are unconscious of a movement when it has become a habit, the movement of the earth, for example. Now, can you see how those two little points of consciousness of I am have merged into a larger I am? And this larger I am, or ego, would not be conscious forever of anything but itself, unless it attracted to itself other atoms, whose friction causes more sensation, more life, more experience. By the unconscious action of the law of attraction, the little egos continue to grow by accumulation. They are mind, therefore they reason upon their sensations. Experience teaches them that it is easier to bring into their organization an atom that spins at almost their speed than to bring one that spins at a much slower speed. There is less inertia to overcome. Thus, natural selection kicks in. The tiny mind, of course, does not reason about the whys and wherefores of its action, that is reserved for a more complex intelligence. All organizations, from the smallest to the largest, are mental statements of experience, and they grow. First, drawing to itself, according to its power, the whole universe. This is will, or desire, in the human ego, and also in all others. Second, by utilizing discrimination according to past experience. Third, organizing its acquisition in the most convenient way. Fourth, the union in a single consciousness. Fifth, by reason projecting an ideal, which is always an improvement of realization. This ideal causes dissatisfaction, which divides the attention, thus relaxing the cohesion and causing disintegration. This disintegration will be enough to allow a change if he trusts his ideals. Otherwise, the dissatisfaction will be great enough to produce complete disintegration or death. His ideal, held in consciousness with hope, transmutes him into a higher state of being. He reorganizes himself. These 7 steps are repeated eternally, producing growth or evolution. Chapter 2. You and the Father are one. In Lesson 1, I stated that growth progresses orderly according to certain fixed laws. I know this from having studied myself. Any other individual can learn not only these laws, but also all other truths by careful self-study. Victor Hugo has rightly said that man is an infinite little copy of God, which is equivalent to saying that man is an epitome of the universe as it is and the potential of all creations to come. Man is a microscopic writing of all history. By carefully deciphering himself, he is able to understand everything else. There is a universal mind that fills space, and of which all things are made, in which all are, and by which all are held in form, while it is best and then dissolve and transmute into higher statements of truth. The invisible is the cause, the thinker. The visible is the effect, the thought. The thinker and his thought are inseparable. They are one, as Jesus said. I and the Father are one. The Father, then, the thinker or invisible mind, being the cause of all things, is the actor. The form or organization is that which is acted upon. The universal mind thinks the universe into forms, which are mental statements or recognition of itself. Thus, the real self of all things is the universal mind, God the law, the same self that is behind or within men, animals, plants, or crystals. Where then does the individual come in? Have you ever been so intensely interested in some work that you forgot yourself? That is practically what happened to the universal mind when it began to think the universe into form. What, at first, was a nebulous awareness that I am gradually formed into expressed statements or ideas of what I am. The latent began to manifest, just as you or I may become so intensely interested in one idea that we forget all others and ourselves. So the universal mind in an individual or expressed idea will lose consciousness of everything other than itself and other forms as they come into relationship with it. Have you ever read Sarah Crewe by Frances Hodgson Burnett? A poor, destitute, and abandoned orphan lives splendidly in the imagination. So absorbed is she in the beauties of her imaginary surroundings that she is perfectly oblivious to the real and to herself. Mrs. Burnett is scientific in her conclusion. A wealthy neighbor learns, through his East India servant, of the girl's surroundings and makes her dream come true. So intense had been his interest in the ideal that he is not even surprised at first when he enters her little attic room, which has been transformed into a bower of splendid beauty. Her firmly held idea became the real thing. The intense absorption of this fictional girl illustrates, to some extent, how the universal mind lost consciousness of itself as a whole in following individual ideas. Man is the idea of God, someone has said. Man, the idea, by reason, will complete the circle and come again to the consciousness that there is only one and I am that one. This consciousness is probably what the Buddhist means by nirvana. Do you realize that the invisible is the source of all power that manifests in the visible? The object of these lessons is to help awaken man to recognize and calculate from this invisible and all-powerful part of himself, instead of remaining a veritable worm of the dust, dependent on the knowledge he has acquired, more or less unconsciously, up to the present, dependent on what has been done, instead of turning to this unrecognized self and thus doing more than what has been done. All progress has hitherto been made by blind dependence upon the invisible and omnipresent self, and intelligent recognition of our source of power will enable us to manifest wonders which we cannot now even conceive. What man has conceived as dependence upon God is neither more nor less than dependence upon his real and as yet unmanifested self. In his ignorance, he has placed God outside himself. The more primitive his knowledge is, the farther he has conceived God. As a man thinks, so is he. As he grows in intelligence, God comes nearer and nearer to him in recognition, until finally he knows that he himself is God. There is no separation. There is only one. Man's idea of his own helplessness and separation from God is based on the belief that his body is himself, rather than being the work, the idea, of himself. Himself includes his thought-constructed body, but he is much more than he believes. He is everything. Man's body being what he believes of himself, it is constructed by thought and modified by every passing fancy. It is the negative pole of his being. To be negative is to be attractive, receptive. To be positive is to be active. Man is a complete magnet, which has its positive and negative poles in the occult and in the visible. When the connection between these poles is broken, the body, which no longer receives the action of the positive, dissolves. The positive pole of the invisible continues to act. Wiser by experience, it recreates itself on a higher plane, recognizes more of itself, makes a clearer statement of truth. Universal mind is the positive pole of the universe. Matter or consciousness is the negative pole. The unexpressed expresses itself constantly and irresistibly. The invisible positive can be trusted to express itself. All the struggles and distresses of mankind are due to ignorance of this fact. Man has invested himself in his own imagination and tried desperately to make the negative man, the body, the actor. He could not but fail, and by his failure be led into doubt. Doubt being the door through which knowledge enters, he is learning that, by the simple recognition of the truth that the body is a means rather than a source of power, it places him in the proper relation to the positive, to allow the positive to use him as a means to do what it will. Knowledge is power. Recognition is the hitch by which we hitch our wagon to a star. Chapter 3. In the stillness. In the uncreated are all things that ever were, are, or ever will be. The uncreated is a boundless pulsating sea of energy, with currents and cross-currents, waves and ripples and depths of stillness. What is stillness? All is motion. Nothing is still. Stillness is movement. But stillness is a motion so intense, a vibration so high, that neither the ear, nor the eye, nor the nose, nor the tongue, nor the fingertips can register it. There was a time when the things we hear now were in stillness, in silence. Why? How is this possible? Because ears had not yet been developed. There were no mechanisms to register such fine energies. Fine vibrations were present then, just as they are now. But they were in the stillness, no form was aware of them. If no one had listened in the silence, all things now in the noise would have remained in the silence. Listening in the silence caused the ears to develop. It was not the noise that developed the ears. Hands never made them. Silence made them. Silence, not noise, not the visible, made all things that ever were or are. Silence does not make ears and throws them into the noise by the fistful. Silence makes ears where there are places prepared for them. Anything will come out of silence when someone is ready for it. There are more things in the silence, in the stillness, than ever came out of it. All these things are eager to come out into the noise. They are pressing to express themselves. All that is now left in the silence is much finer, pleasant and pleasurable than anything that has so far come out into the noise. Do you want something better than what you have had, seen, tasted, smelled or felt? Have you tasted all these things, and yet you are not satisfied? Have you run hither and thither in search of satisfaction, of happiness, and not found it? If you are convinced that you cannot be satisfied with the world as it is, then close your eyes to the world as it is. And don't call it a bad world because you are dissatisfied with it. It is a good world, a beautiful world. It is suitable for other people. Let them enjoy it. After a while they will get tired of it too, and maybe they will follow you. There is only one place of refuge when one is tired of the world as it is. Go to the stillness. The small fine breezes are much gentler and more powerful than the winds and cyclones, the floods and earthquakes of noise. Go into the stillness and feel these fine little breezes. They are always clean winds. They will drive away from your brain the malaria of dissatisfaction and the mists of ignorance. They are refreshing little zephyrs. They bring healing on their wings. Stay in the silence for a long time. Let these gentle winds of energy blow past you and swirl around you. They are wonderful magicians. They will build you new organs of sense, new eyes, much finer than the ones you have now, with which to see things in the silence, new ears that will hear things never spoken in the noise, things impossible for man to utter. Be still. Do not come out of the stillness yet. There are more things the holy still breezes will do for you. They will give you a new tongue, a silver tongue tipped with love. There is much love in the silence, more than there is of noise in the noise. This new tongue will enable you to tell in the noise, to all people, things previously impossible to utter. Thus you will become the medium through which more of the beauties of the invisible will become visible. Postscript. I wrote a nice scientific lesson 3, explaining the first step in growth as stated in lesson 1. All organizations, from the smallest to the largest, are mental statements of experience and grow by, first, attracting or drawing to itself, according to its power, from the whole universe. This is will or desire, in the human ego and in all others as well. This scientific lesson was too scientific and not clear enough for me, so I went into stillness to review it and received, that is, drew or drew near, from the silence the above prose poem, illustrative rather than explanatory, of the first step of the law of growth. If the reader takes this lesson with him into that same stillness, and absorbs it rather than tries to understand it, the still forces will make this first step of growth clear to him. Chapter 4. Growth. The uncreated is a pulsating sea of energy, never still. All degrees of motion are present everywhere. The created is as much of this energy as it has become conscious of itself. Consciousness is produced by the friction of energy upon energy. In the universe there is only energy, i.e., living substance. This is illustrated by the currents of a river. If the bed were perfectly uniform, the current would also be uniform. The current would be unaware of its movement. The irregular bed causes currents. When these currents interfere with each other, there is consciousness. An eddy is formed. Consciousness is produced by the friction of energy on form, says C.C. Post. Imagine that the whirlpool formed in a current has the power to remain a whirlpool, even if the currents change and cease to pass in the same manner in which the whirlpool was formed, and you will have a good idea of the mode of creation of the first primitive forms. That was the beginning of the individual. It would have gone on whirling eternally as it had been set in motion had it not been for the further action upon it of this pulsating sea of energy. This conscious little whirlpool, enjoying the sensation of consciousness, wishes to continue it as it first experienced it. Here is clearly illustrated discrimination, the second step in growth, order, the third, and cohesion, the fourth step. As long as this primitive individual chose to remain as he was, he remained. It could have perpetuated itself for all eternity had it so chosen. So great is the power of the individual. What happens to you and me when we have enjoyed a pleasurable sensation for a time, without variation? We get tired. The primitive whirlpool grew tired of its new sensation for the same reason. All that time, the ceaseless energy of the universe played around it without effect. He remained like a solid rock in a stream, enjoying, oblivious, unawakened to anything beyond his own sensation or awareness. He became less and less satisfied with himself, with his sensation, and began to desire a change. What change he desired he did not know. He had never experienced more than a kind of sensation. This undefined something of his desires is for him an ideal. The more he thinks about it, the less he enjoys it. His ideal makes him lose control over himself. He no longer chooses to remain as he is, choice being will, and will being the only power that holds the individual together. He begins to disintegrate. He becomes soft. If he were a man, as he will one day be, we would say of him, he is in pieces. Now this living sea of energy has a chance with him. The energy plays with him. Great waves sweep him from his former resting place. He wallows among other unsatisfied individuals, and his jagged edges soften. Softer and more powerful waves play with him. More and more subtle forces play through him, changing all the currents of his being. The friction of all this energy upon the old form of consciousness brings about a new consciousness, new sensations which were impossible to him, while self-satisfaction held him so tightly together that finer energies had no chance to affect him. By the action of the energy upon his old consciousness or form, his vague ideal, the something more he has longed for, takes form. He becomes conscious of what is the something more he longs for. His ideal is always an improvement on the old reality. Why? Don't you see that his ideal is the result of subtler forces acting upon the old form? Therefore, the old form is refined, becomes finer, which is equivalent to saying that the old consciousness is refined, becomes finer. The finer the force, the more intangible, the more powerful it is. This is proved by all observations. If you doubt it, study the material sciences. This fact proves two things. First, that the primitive individual must have been the result of the action of the coarsest forces upon each other, because the coarsest forces, from steam to dust, are the most tangible to man. Second, all change must be from fine to finer, from higher to higher, because a form produced by the action of any degree of energy could not be changed by the action upon it of a lower or less powerful degree of energy. Reflect well on this statement. It is the scientific reason why everything is good. It is also the explanation of the fact that man cannot judge rightly according to outward appearances. All acts, as well as all form or consciousness, are produced by the action of invisible forces, always superior upon visible or realized forces. Only in this way can growth manifest itself. Granting this as a process of growth, retrogression is impossible, unthinkable. Disintegration is not retrogression, but progression. Sickness, pain, anger, rage, despair, death are the effect of the action of the subtler forces upon the realized forces, and they always precede the realization of the higher until the moment when the individual knows the law of his growth, when he will recognize its source and let the higher forces act upon him without resistance. He will turn, like a child from a discarded toy, from the already realized to the ideal, thus reducing resistance to a minimum. Resistance is the cause of all disease, sin, sorrow, sickness, and dissolution. The cause of resistance is fear. The cause of fear is the lack of knowledge of the absolute certainty of progress, the absolute certainty that all is good. As the individual's understanding of the law of his growth increases, fear decreases. As fear diminishes, resistance to change diminishes. As resistance to change ceases, change does not produce disease. This law works to the millimeter and immutably. Truth will deliver you from sin and death, and nothing else can do it. Morale. Stop trying to shut out fear and seek understanding. Surrender yourself to the play of the higher forces, whose action upon your present consciousness produces a higher understanding. Chapter 5. What God is for. The uncreated is not wisdom. It is not understanding. It is mute, blind, formless, will-less, ignorant energy. It is God. It is the potential of all things, just as Niagara is the potential of all the electric lights, street railroads, and factories the United States will ever need. God and Niagara are, relatively speaking, equally ignorant. Intelligence is a matter of consciousness. The word means in-said, formed in. Niagara and God, the uncreated, both happened, that is, unconsciously, swirled and boiled and did many things, and still do, without knowing what they are doing. They made little swirls, as I showed you in the last lesson. And where these little whirlpools are formed, in God or in Niagara, God and Niagara are conscious. As much of God as is in one of these little swirls in him or her, he wants to keep it swirling. By the action of the rest of God, still unconscious. On these little whirlpools they grow and grow until they become more consciousness, with more and more complex movements, producing a more and more complex consciousness. This is the process of intelligence formation. We could kneel down and bow with folded hands and watery eyes, beg God, the uncreated one, to do something for us, beg until we die. He, or it, would answer us as Niagara would in similar circumstances, rushing blindly, dumbly, ignorantly, as if we had not begged him. The only way to achieve anything we desire is to understand God, the uncreated, and use it, just as we understand Niagara, and use it, and make it answer our prayers. God is good, but he is not good at all. It takes God and you, or God and me, to be good for anything. God is asleep. We need to wake him up to activity. He is almighty energy, but he needs direction. We sons of men are the board of directors. We study the situation. We review what has been done, and, lo and behold, it does not satisfy. We see that there is much room for improvement. We wish to improve. After pleading loudly, and for a long time to no avail, we have finally awakened to the truth that if something is to be improved, we will have to improve it ourselves. We have also pleaded with each other to improve the present evils, and, lo and behold, each has failed us. We are obliged, each for himself, to see what he can do to improve conditions, so everyone for himself has rushed wildly up and down, trying to reform everyone else, and has failed. There is only one thing left to try. Everyone for himself must turn to the source of power to improve himself, the only thing over which he can hope to have power, for, as each one tries to perfect himself, the whole will be perfected. Of course, how stupid not to have thought of it before, but we are learning. So each man for himself studies the created, sees the deficiencies, projects an ideal, enters the silence where the inexhaustible energy, free to all, flows unceasingly, and there appropriates as much of God as he wishes, with which to manifest his idea. Man and God are one. Without man, the Son, God would always be blind, formless, ignorant. Without God, the soundless reservoir of energy, man would have no source of power and would be unable to grow. But man is, and God is, and man and God are well. Chapter 6. Inspiration. There is a spirit in man, and the inspiration of the Almighty gives understanding. Elihu in the book of Job. There is a spirit in man that inspires the uncreated spirit, just as the lungs inspire oxygen, and as oxygen received causes chemical changes in the body, so the uncreated spirit received causes changes in thought. This is my version of what Elihu said. I like Elihu's version better than mine, but mine is more scientific and easier to understand, while his is poetic and no less true. Where do you suppose that spirit is to be found? At the top, of course, at the top of the head. There are many spirits in man, good spirits and bad spirits, who are also good spirits. Every little cell of the body embodies a spirit. Each group of cells is the embodiment of a larger spirit, an ego, composed of an aggregation of harmonious spirits, just as each society has a spirit, although each separate individual has a spirit, is a spirit. The whole body is an organization of spirits. The body is spirit. The spirit is mind. Mind is spirit. There is only one, the higher brain, the ideal brain, is a pair of lungs to breathe into the body more of the uncreated spirit. Every portion of the brain, beginning with the solar plexus, has in turn been the ideal brain, the higher. Consciousness has lived in each of these brains in turn. Consciousness is always aspiring, reaching upward. This aspiration is an attraction of finer forces than have been realized before. These finer forces, drawn from the uncreated into the created, cause actual chemical changes in all the tissues of the body, disorganizing and reorganizing on a higher plane. Do you remember what happens on the window pane on a cold morning when a fire is lit? The glass acts as a condenser, changing the shape of the moisture in the air. It becomes tangible. Where heat and cold, positive and negative, come into contact, precipitation occurs. The surface of the brain is this point of contact between the positive and the negative, the uncreated and the created, spirit and matter. The positive always acts upon the negative, the higher and finer forces upon the lower or coarser. The natural attitude of man is one of aspiration toward the uncreated and of command toward the created, negative toward the superior. positive toward all that is inferior. This natural attitude is maintained in all the lower orders of life. Consequently, growth is healthy and rapid. As intelligence developed, man gradually directed almost all his attention toward the created, thus isolating himself from the source of his power. He denied his highest and focused his attention on the already manifested. Thus he became negative toward the visible and positive toward the invisible, reversing the natural order. Mankind in general has done this. Here and there a sage has arisen who has warned them of their error. Few heeded him, but experience is a thorough teacher. Famine and pestilence, tribulation and distress have been the result, until man has been compelled, in his despair, to raise his attention again to the highest. Man has denied his highest, his ideal, his uncreated, until experience has taught him that nowhere else can he find satisfaction. So he rises again to the highest, the top of the head, and breathes in the life that has awaited him all this time and from which he has turned away. The action of the uncreated spirit upon the highest brain, hitherto evolved in the individual, produces in the consciousness, in the brain, the ideals of the individual. These ideals are the most potent forces of his being. Attention is the door through which the ideal enters into reality. He who looks steadily to his highest ideal will most certainly realize it, and as he approaches its realization, he will find that still higher ideals are formed in him. The free and constant inspiration of the Almighty gives him a higher and higher understanding. Chapter 7. The Philosophy of Inspiration. All the diseases possible to mankind, from bile to cork-leg or impecuniousness, are the result of temperament. There is no way to permanently cure any unpleasant condition, except by understanding and correcting the temperament. A healer of any kind, MD, DD, or MSD, may succeed in relieving the condition, just as one might an unsightly sore by removing the scab that has formed. But as long as the cause remains unaltered, the forces continue to act and, in due course, will produce the disease again. And the process is repeated again and again, each time with more and more insistence, until at last the first cause is found and removed. Every phrenologist, astrologer, and palmistry knows that every temperament has its peculiar diseases and experiences, but it remains for the student of mind to discover that these diseases and experiences are the result of temperament and can be entirely corrected. A man's temperament is simply the sum of his fixed habits of thought. Most of his habits of thought are received from his parents and attendants, while he is too young to discriminate consciously. The habits of thought of his parents are to the child, before and after birth, what the soil, air, and water are to the seed. The parents are the child's environment. Just as the seed selects from its environment what it considers most suitable for its uses, so the unborn self absorbs from the parents what harmonizes with it. The thousands of cases of twins who, having the same environment, are so different from each other, even in infancy, amply demonstrate that this is true. Each has assimilated from the temperament of the parents' habits of thought what is related to himself. To me, this fact is the strongest proof of the truth of reincarnation. Why should children of the same conception choose different elements from the parents, unless each is governed in his selection by knowledge previously acquired? Desire, in some previous state of existence, has led the ego to the particular persons whose elements of thought will gratify its desires, true or false. Since each individual embodies both truth and error, it is easy to see how two children can assimilate such different temperaments from the same parents. Parents are a magnet. Disembodied souls who have in them that which relates them to the magnet thus find, by the work of the omnipresent law of attraction, their own particular place in the universe, the only environment which offers them the opportunities they need for their further development. Each individual temperament has its habits of true thought and its habits of false thought. Each particular habit attracts experiences, environment according to its kind. The correspondence not only of bodily diseases, but also of external experiences with the temperament is absolutely fixed. It is governed by an unalterable law, the law of attraction. You can no more change that law than you can change the orbit of the earth. Whatsoever you sow, that shall you reap. All the worry and fretting and planning and effort to evade the law is worse than useless, for that very effort is developing another false thought habit, whose attracted experience will be unpleasant and absolutely certain to find you. There is only one way to successfully evade unpleasant conditions, whether of the body or of the environment, and that is to correct the temperament. Every thought that passes through the mind's eye has its place in the temperamental structure. The changing of habits of thought is a matter of forming new habits. The formation of all habits of thought is accomplished by the constant effort of the objective surface mind every day. As a mode of thought becomes habitual, it gradually sinks into the submind, where it acts unconsciously for us. It is said that 95% of our thinking takes place in this subself, the habit mind, and all this thought has been established there by the conscious 5% of our thinking in our past lives, both in this and in previous incarnations or states of being. The objective thinking of the 5%, the creative and directive thinking, is realized through the use of the higher brain. Secondary thinking is realized in all other parts of the body. This is not a figure of speech. Every organ, node and cell in the body thinks, and it thinks as it has been taught by its teacher, that mighty 5%, the objective, everyday mind, which is assimilating the ideas written here. The whole body will continue to think and feel as it has been taught to think and feel. If any change occurs in the body, it is the result of a change in the objective mind. Whatever appears in the body was sent there by the objective mind. Every conscious thought is creating bodily conditions. The body is the obedient servant of the higher brain. It is never the master, except to the extent that the higher brain allows it to usurp authority, which still places the responsibility on the higher brain. The conscious, objective mind in the brain is the positive or active pole of the magnet man. Everything below it is negative, i.e., acted upon. The higher brain is, and always has been, lord and master of the body. Does that strike you as too materialistic? But in reality, there is nothing materialistic about it. Man does not live in a physical world, but in a physical conception of the world. Listen now. While the higher brain is the lord of the body, there is another higher one which is the lord of all. The I am that I am is positive to the brain as the brain is to the body. The higher brain is the present consciousness of the I am. This is as true of the lower order of life as it is of man himself, as true of primitive man as it is of Christ. The I am that I am is constantly working upon the higher of the individual to unfold itself, to make that individual more conscious of itself, the One. The I am neither slumbers nor sleeps. It acts with omnipresent power, inexorable power, loving power upon the brain, pressing for recognition. This is what Jesus meant when he declared, "Behold, I, the I am, stand at the door and knock. And if any man open to me, I will come to him. I will sup with him, and he with me." We are told that the atmosphere presses upon us at the rate of 15 pounds per square inch. Who can measure the mighty force of the I am that I am? It will not be denied. Sooner or later, every individual recognizes its insistent call and opens the door that it may enter. And eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither hath it entered into the heart of man. The glories that await the one who opens to receive from his I am. The door through which the I am enters is at the top of the brain. It enters not as a person, not even as an idea, but as a stream of the finest energy, the most positive energy. The action of this stream of finest energy upon the already organized brain refines it, dissolving and resolving its present tissues into new ideas. Ideas are organizations of thought force, and thoughts are things. That is, they are substantial as is the body, only more so, i.e., finer and more powerful. What is conceived in the brain by the action of the I am is sent from the brain through the nerve highways to the whole body. Being finer and as positive, it acts upon the negative tissues of the body, just as the I am acts upon the brain, dissolving and redissolving the tissues according to its own pattern, the pattern given you on the mountain or head. The highest intelligence of each individual is his most potent force. Thought conceived by the action of his I am. It is the truth that the I am has revealed to him. He has obtained it through the soul sense. It is the direct result of inspiration, the same kind of inspiration we read about. The I am has always been speaking to us in this way, to every being on earth or in the heavens, but because of our limited intelligence, we have denied our higher thoughts as visionary and impractical. Thus, ignorantly, we have forbidden them to incarnate in the body. We have refused to receive the inspiration given to us, ignoring its divine values. We have made for ourselves a prison of the real. The actual has held us in its mighty womb, until we have grown to such proportions that we must be born again, born from above. All creation groans and travails in pain until the manifestation of the sons of God. Oh, you who entangle yourself in the imprisonment of the actual and cry bitterly to the gods for a realm where to rule and create, know this for certain: the thing you seek is already with you, here or nowhere, if only you could see. Thomas Carlyle. Look up, my dear, and look. Look to the ideals which are the source of all power. Look to the actual which is plastic to receive the impression of the ideal. Behold the omnipotent power that is at your disposal, the realm in which you can create. Caleb entered the promised land because he wholly followed the Lord his God. On the same principle, and only thus, will we reach our promised land of immunity from disease of every kind. We must consciously elevate ourselves to the ideal realm, the highest, and live there. For what we think we embody. We are what we have recognized. We will be what we are recognizing today. In each moment we choose the higher or something less elevated. Our highest thought, persisting in it, will change any defect of temperament and thus deliver us from sickness and death. Let patience do her perfect work. Chapter 8. Desire. I wonder you have already realized that reason is a very poor guide. The highest intelligence is inadequate as a director, even of the daily affairs of life. The man who depends most absolutely upon his reason is precisely the one who makes the most mistakes. And then he laments, "Why, when I try so hard to do the right thing, does everything go wrong?" Reason is a blind guide, and by allowing reason to usurp the throne as director, all the sickness and unhappiness there is has come into the world. However, reason is entirely good and infallible. As far as it goes, it does not go far enough to be a safe guide for any man. The further vision of reason is better than its foresight, because experience is the teacher of reason. Experience furnishes the premises from which reason draws its conclusions. Every hour man passes through new and hitherto untried experiences. Until he has passed through them, he does not have sufficient data to draw correct conclusions. Therefore, man must have a better guide than reason if he is to avoid mistakes. Man has recognized this instinctively and has developed a God to guide him. As each new experience is added to his stock of knowledge, man has reorganized his concept of God. His God is the product of his reason and is small or large according to the premises from which he reasons. In this way, man has finally developed the conception that God is the law inherent in every atom of the universe, the law of attraction by which we keep ourselves in shape, or dissolve at the instance of a stronger attraction to reorganize ourselves. The law must be our guide and the illuminator of reason. But how can we know the mind of the law and recognize its directives? The law is inherent in every atom of the universe and in every organization of atoms. The manifest law is the simple sensation we call desire. Desire is the voice of God. Desire is the recognized law of attraction. Desire is the unreasoning and unerring cry of the ego, of every ego, from the original atom to the Christ man, for that which is related to itself, for that which is a necessity in the process of unfoldment. The blade of grass desires the sap, without which it must die. The animal desires its prey, and each of them satisfies its desires and develops normally and rapidly. But man refuses to satisfy his desires and consequently gets into all kinds of trouble, that is, into new experiences. The more he denies his desires, the more experience he acquires, new premises from which to reason. Desire, whether satisfied or not, is the illuminator of reason. Denied desire is perverted and brings bitter experiences. Satisfied desire brings healthy experience. All experience teaches. For centuries, reason has denied desire its right to rule. The result is a multiplication and complication of physical and environmental ills. From this bitterness, reason is learning its error, and in due time will again enthrone desire as ruler. Then the individual will experience paradise regained. Every organism has a conscious and a subconscious mind. The conscious mind is employed in acquiring new experiences. As the new is acquired, it gradually descends to the submind, the mind of habit, and there it functions as instinct, desire. Instinct is the knowing quality of desire. Desire is the active quality of instinct. The two are one. Nothing ever descends to the submind, to the habit mind, until it has been fully demonstrated and accepted by the conscious mind. The conscious mind, therefore, though always committed to the highest knowledge yet attained, is necessarily less reliable than the submind, for the reason that its deductions have not yet been demonstrated or proved. The moment they are demonstrated, they become part of the instinctive mind, the submind. Throughout all past ages, the individual has acquired knowledge by this process. In the submind is stored all the wisdom of these ages of experience. This submind is the human body. Every atom of the body and organization of atoms, every organ, is the storehouse of its own peculiar type of knowledge, all acquired and tested and accepted in past ages by the conscious mind, the reasoning mind. Psychologists say that 95% of our thinking is subconscious. All this subconscious thinking is tried and tested. Therefore, it is more reliable than conscious reasoning. All subconscious knowledge is connected with the conscious mind and can be evoked, recalled at the behest of the conscious mind. The only reason why this is not a proven fact in every individual is that reason has denied a hearing to this previously acquired knowledge. It has more or less completely divorced itself from its own previous conclusions by simple denial. Here is depicted the little story of the Garden of Eden. Woman, instinct, intuition, desire, proven wisdom. Taken from man, reason, and then subjected to him. Reason wants to be self-sufficient, but is tested by desire, falls, is expelled from Eden, innocent self-gratification, wanders, outcast, dragging desire captive, but is finally redeemed again by desire, union, paradise regained. How are we to open up this knowledge stored in the submind so that we may have its premises, as well as our newly acquired daily premises, from which to reason? By understanding and desiring rather than denying the voice of instinctive wisdom. Every atom of knowledge stored in the body, the submind, has its little cry for more, more. This little cry is desire. All these atoms of proven knowledge, of wisdom, unite in a great desire for something not yet attained. This something is to the individual what sap is to the tree, its life, that for which it grows. To deny this desire, its gratification, is to deny life to the organization. Man grows only by the gratification of desire. Desire is the recognized and always infallible law. Satisfied desire brings new experiences, providing new material for reason to consider. To deny desire is to close to reason its only means of orderly development. Desire will not be denied. It is omnipotent. Throughout all these ages, when man has tried to deny desire, it has tempted him and made him fall in spite of himself. And every fall has been upward. Man has grown by satisfying his desires, never by repressing them. Repression only enlarges the desire, which sooner or later will break the bonds imposed by reason and do its will. This is the process by which the greater part of the growth of ages has been, and all the terrible experiences of mankind come from the outburst of desire after periods of repression, days or years or generations of repression, as the case may be. Calamities have multiplied until the world has been filled with bondage and force and fear, explosions and death. But in the midst of all this, like the tiny germ in the kernel of corn, there is growing the self-knowledge that will break the last band and set us free. The truth will set us free from the law of sin and death. The conscious mind and the subconscious mind are one. There is no dividing line between them, except when the conscious reason puts a division and says to the subconscious, "Thus far and no farther shalt thou go." The conscious mind is reasoning will. The subconscious mind is instinctive desire, the result of past reasoning will. Reasoning will and instinctive desire are one, both in their nature and in the character of their operation. The recognition of this fact is the union to which all ages of growth have led. There is no war between right and wrong, nor between good and evil, except for the mind that denies its own unification, the unified mind. The unified mind knows that all is good and leads to a greater good. It has found its good, God, in itself, and it has learned that desire is the voice of God. And there shall be no more war, but each in his separate star shall draw the thing as he sees it, to the God of things as they are. Chapter 9. More desire. Why do you think it is weakness on your part for you to seek help from a healer? That idea is based on a misconception of your own nature. Desire for anything is an indication of strength, not weakness, and the gratification of desire increases your strength. Suppose you are hungry and refuse to eat. Would you gain or lose strength? Every desire is a hunger, the voice of a need in you, and it always points in the right direction. When you desire bread and butter, you need it to feed your strength. When you desire the help of a teacher, you need the particular mental pabulum that the teacher can give you. Your strength lies in your ability to assimilate what you are given, not in your ability to do without it. If you refuse to follow your desire in this matter, or in any other, you force yourself to draw the mental elements you need and must have from a scarce source of supply instead of a rich one. It is as if you refuse to give a fertile soil to your growing plants and instead give them only clay. You are, in the truest sense, the product of your environment, seen and unseen, create and uncreate. The desire, the law, has drawn to you each and every particularity of that environment, and the desire, conscious and unconscious, is modifying the environment in each moment. The environment is each moment reacting upon you, producing changes in consciousness, that is, new intelligence. The way you respond to stimuli from your environment, seen and unseen, determines the quality of change in you. If you respond reluctantly, protesting, to the demands of your environment, the changes in you are slow and painful. If, on the other hand, you respond freely, willingly, to your environment, your growth is rapid and delightful. It is natural to respond readily to all environmental stimuli, and such response is a lost art only in humanity. Like all other lost arts, this one of prompt response to our environment is being rediscovered and put to intelligent use for man's blessing. The idea of evil is the root of all problems, of all diseases. Man protests against the environment simply because it is evil to him. Man responds readily to all stimuli which he recognizes as good. Every environment is good, and the recognition of this fact restores the lost art of rapid response to its stimulus, which is the secret of rapid and happy growth. The key to all that the most radical idealist can desire is the recognition of the positive goodness of all things, the recognition of the positive goodness of all things. He who, closing his eyes to evil, lives most persistently and patiently in the affirmation of all good, will most quickly find paradise regained. But let me tell you right here that Christian Science, or to be more specific, Eddie Science, the Christian Science way of saying all is good, will do you no permanent good on the path of growth. To think that all that really is good, and that all sin, sickness, and death in the world is only imaginary, is simply another way of saying good and evil, God and the devil. Your terms are changed, but your mind, all there is of you, still holds the warring elements good and evil. As a man thinketh, so is he. To purge your mind of all evil, this purges you of all evil, you must take sin, sickness, and death into the all good. Affirm them as positively good, until the good spirit, the word in you, teaches your reason to understand how good the Almighty is, and by the time you have let it teach you to understand how sin, sickness, and death in general and in particular are good, you will find yourself above sin, sickness, and death forever. You will never find yourself in that heaven where without is as within, where your desires are all good and all gratified, where the inner man is glorious and his environment all beautiful, until you can transmute every particular evil within and without, recognizing its goodness and responding to its encouragement. This is another way of saying we grow by the gratification of our desires, but we cannot consent to gratify our desires until we know they are good. Our desires are often so strong that they gratify themselves despite our lack of consent. And we grow by that gratification through because we involuntarily responded to the désiré, we reap from its gratification more pain than pleasure. I am very impressed by a beautiful little poem written by my friend M. Virginia Rust Humphrey, which illustrates, or rather suggests, the effect of resisting desire. She titles her poem, Resistance. I found temptation in my path. Oh, my own life, how beautiful she was. She held out her beautiful hands to me and cried, "Taste the sweets and pleasures of life while you can." Oh, how my soul was tried. Oh, how I longed to clasp her to my heart in a passionate embrace. The temptress, still pleading, "Come on, don't let this joy elude your eager grasp." But as I yielded to the call so sweet, so strong, I heard another voice, low and sad. I stopped to listen and heard it say, "Don't give in, or you are lost." It was my guardian angel, aware of my destiny. I looked at his sweet face and I got the victory. Thank God, that she was not a moment too late, or I was lost and irrecoverable. Oh yes, I thank God, and yet, the joy I lost would have been worth it all. I have two departments in my conscience at war with each other. In one department, the sweets and pleasures of life belong all, and in the other, my guardian angel dwells. My desires asked for sweets and pleasures, and other desires asked for the good represented by my guardian angel, aware of my destiny, the consequences. If I had known what I know now, that there is really no boundary between these departments of my nature, that all is good, I would have tasted the sweets and pleasures of life, my guardian angel, conscience and caution, both the fruit of education, would have smiled approvingly. I, having naturally responded to all my desires, to the stimuli of the objective and subjective environment, would have been richer and happier for the experience, and would have been prepared for a still greater experience, a higher experience. For we soon tire of one kind and seek a new one. Thus we grow. But what did I do? I weighed good and evil, being then too ignorant to know that all is good, and chose to grant the desire of the guardian angel side of me, the subjective, and was glad because his desire had been satisfied. So I was ready for an even higher experience, not so the objective side, which was hungry, with its desire still unsatisfied. Now, these two departments of my nature are interdependent, and neither can be at ease, happy, unless the other is. Just as my head cannot be happy if my chest aches, or if my stomach cries out for food. Therefore, out of ignorance of the fact that I am all good, all my desires, hungers, legitimate, and their gratification a necessity for further growth, I fed one half of my desires and denied the other half, which never ceased to cry out, "The joy I lost would have been worth all the subjective suffering it cost." So I remain unhappy, unsatisfied, unwilling to move on. This remorse will remain in me. This desire for the goodies and pleasures of life may dampen in me for a while, but sooner or later it will be gratified, because it is the call of the indestructible self for what I must have to grow. If I starve this objective part of me for too long, I will die. But death is only a gateway to another state of being, and I will carry the result of all my experiences, with all my unfulfilled longings, to this new state. Perhaps the new state will be, as I am inclined to believe, a new incarnation here, in which case I will come into the world again with a set of instincts or desires that are the result of the response I have given to all my past environment. And that old unsatisfied longing for the sweets and pleasures of life will awaken and take on the fresh vigor of childhood. Now the probability is that this desire will control me in this new state of being, and I will drink my fill. I will be bad. I will take all I want of the sweets and pleasures of life until I am more than satisfied and ready to give the subjective side of me another listen. Thus I may swing from one extreme to the other, and vice versa, perhaps innumerable times, always gaining experience and reason, until at last I recognize my own quality and the unity of that dual nature, the real goodness of all self. From that moment I am free to follow all desire, because I know that all desire is good and leads to more good. I am a God, knower of good and evil. I am wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. I create by my word, in my image and likeness. Every good and perfect gift comes from me. I am God. Chapter 10. A desirable text. The opening article on desire comes all the more strongly to me because all my life, from childhood, and I am now 48, I have been a martyr to a full and large New England consciousness, inherited from my father in particular. My life has been a struggle to be guided and governed by moral law and not by desire. Do not teach, under the impulse of the loving nature of a woman reaching out to help others, to be guided by desire rather than by the moral law of God or the good. The race is largely so attuned to the moral law now that it is either written on their hearts, as the Bible says, or it has become a fixture in their instinctive minds, as you put it. It's involuntary, unconscious, subliminal. Do not write to unsettle him by appealing to his reason to the contrary. This excerpt from a letter written by a New York correspondent provides me with a good text for the next chapter on desire. Let me summarize my teaching on desire. First, desire is the law of attraction. It becomes conscious through recognition. Second, desire is the will of the sub-self, the conscious attraction of truth realized by more and more. It is the appetite, the hunger of the sub-self for what it needs. Third, all realized truth made its entrance into the sub-mind through reason, the objective, superficial mind. Until reason proves the instinctive mind, the sub-mind does not accept. Fourth, once accepted by the sub-mind, a truth remains there for eternity. It is written in the heart, and therefore it is instinctive, that is to say, it works subconsciously. It is habit. Fifth, reason, dealing always with new experiences, cannot have all the premises from which to draw a conclusion until the experiences have passed. Hence reason is a fallible guide, an uncertain prophet. Sixth, desire is the voice of 95% of demonstrated truth. Hence it calls always for what is right. That is, it attracts experiences, good or bad, from which reason will test and accept a new truth, to find in its turn its place in the submind. Centuries ago it was written, I will put my law in their inward parts, and write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me. The subyo, the instinctive mind, is the inner part, the heart, upon which the law of good is being written. Experience is to us exactly what drawings, pieces of cardboard, toothpicks, etc. are to kindergarten children. As with them, reason, the objective mind, proves some things to be good and others bad, that is, useless, worthless. Reason finally accepts only the good, and that good becomes instinctive. This assertion is corroborated by the conclusions of Thomson J. Hudson, based on his very extensive psychical research, and announced in his thoughtful work, Law of Psychic Phenomena. Incidentally, that book is a liberal education in itself. Every thinker along these new lines should read it. Hudson is supported by many other scientists in his assertions that no man can be compelled or persuaded to do, even when hypnotized, what is against his principles, i.e., his nature, as expressed in the subjective mind, the sub-mind. Hudson's conclusion is that man's principles are instinctive. I do not know whether he understands how they become instinctive. As a man thinks, so is he. Caution and conscience are almost kindred and next-door neighbors in the skull. Both are born of belief in good and evil, God and the devil. Both result entirely from ignorance of the fact that there is only one energy, one quality of experience, one law, the law of attraction, whose consciousness is desire, in the whole universe. To be a martyr to a full, large New England consciousness, or to a consciousness of any other origin, is a confession of ignorance. However, both awareness and caution are good. They lift us up and stick pins in us to keep us from falling deeply asleep in our ignorance. They keep us thinking and working until we finally prove to ourselves that it's all really good. I myself have a big number 6 conscience and have been a martyr to it. I paid so much attention to it for years that it paid me as a child, pays the parent who fears it and pampers its every whim. My conscience and my prudence were a spoiled pair. They would settle for nothing. Eventually I rebelled against such tyranny and literally gave them a piece of my mind, the good part. Now they are as docile as Mary's little lamb. They have learned that I am God and that I could not be evil even if I tried, for the law of love, God, is written on my heart. There is no danger of unsettling people by teaching the goodness of desire, for no one can follow desire until he realizes that it is good, until reason is convinced. If he accepts this teaching simply as an excuse to gratify evil desire, he will gain experience, it is true, but it will be an experience he will not care to repeat. Only he who has ears can hear or receive any teaching. The law of attraction governs all knowledge. Just remember the hard times you have had trying to hammer mental science or any other new idea into people's heads, and you will realize that only those who have ears can hear. Everyone has as good intentions as you or me. They just haven't yet developed ears for our particular kind of truth. Tell the truth as you see it, and let them hear it, or not, as they can. Speak the truth when they ask you to. Cast not your pearls before swine. You are not obliged to convince people to see the truth. The truth, which is powerful, will prevail. What is the moral law? A matter of education, pure and simple. The moral law in India requires drowning the baby girl of the very spiritual mother in the holy Ganges, and her Indian conscience number 6 whips her to despair if she does not obey the moral law. Moses promulgated a more complex moral law, to whose vibrations the Jewish world gradually responds. Jesus of Nazareth announced the pinnacle of the moral law, the one immutable law of the universe, the law of love, or attraction, or desire. Do unto others as you would desire them to do unto you. The universe is attuned, not being attuned, to the vibrations of love. Its tones are swelling into divine harmonies now. The music of the spheres is reality, not mere poetic fantasy. Whatever beliefs man may have which are not in accordance with the law of love or desire are doomed to the bottomless pit of oblivion. Experience is teaching him that happiness, the sole end and aim of creation, can only be attained by living, that is to say, thinking in accordance with the law of his being, the law of love or desire. The recognition of love is joy, life. The recognition of non-love is pain, death. As a man thinketh, so is he. To think love is to be love, and to be love is joy. Moral law is variable, the result of man's reason, and depends for its nature on how much love its promulgator has realized. Jesus realized perfect love, perfect as your Father which is in heaven. The law itself is perfect. Therefore its moral law will never be improved, though the perfect application of that law will occupy eternity and infinity. Loving nature of woman, says my correspondent. If God is love, what truer impulse could a human being have than his loving nature? Love is never wrong. It is the impulse of non-love that sins, that misses the mark of truth. My correspondent has snippets of the truth that, in the fullness of time, love, or God, will unite into a harmonious whole, a kind of quilt of love that covers all, appealing to reason on contrary lines. Honey, there are no contrary lines. All things fit together, everything works for good, and everything is necessary and in its place. We just haven't put them together in our minds yet. That is all. But we are learning. Chapter 11. Follow the desire. When a man begins to believe that he is all good, and that his desires are the expression of the law, he finds himself in the peculiar state of mind described by Paul. When I would do good, behold, evil is present with me. He cannot free himself from the belief that some of his desires are evil. Many of his desires seem to be evidently pointing in the wrong direction. Your desires seem to be divided against themselves. And they are. Beliefs in good and evil, God and the devil, have been built into his being, and each set of beliefs has its own peculiar attractions or desires. As a man thinketh, so is he, and his desires are the attraction of his thoughts, however many thoughts may complement them. Man, by thinking that there are two powers in the universe, opposed to each other, has built two opposites within himself. He has become a dual being, a good and evil being, with two types of desires to match. The man with the more evil thoughts has the more evil desires, as he thinks. But man's thoughts are only dual. Man himself is a unity, one with the Father, a wholly good being. To the extent that he recognizes this fact, he will build good only in his mental mansion, his house not made with hands, his body, and in that same proportion will his desires be good. The recognition of good is the only possible means of salvation from evil. All is good is the idea that will transform man by renewing his mind, which is the builder and ruler of his body. The idea of all is good is the true Savior of mankind, the Christ of this age. And truly, this second coming of Christ is universal, from the east to the west. It is not a man's efforts to overcome the lower self that will save him from a hint of sin. He may develop enough willpower to keep his evil desires from gratifying or expressing themselves for a while, but they are there deep in his consciousness, like caged beasts just waiting for the opportunity, which, sooner or later, comes. They were born and raised in it, and grew up within it, by simple recognition as a man thinks. And the only way he can completely dislodge them from himself is by displacing them with the recognition of their opposite. It is man's ideas that form and transform him. It is his faith that saves him, not his works. Fight until doomsday against the evil demons in you, and they will only fight back, and like all hunted creations, they will become more fierce and destructive. Your recognition of them keeps them alive. As a man thinks, a hungry animal is more dangerous than a well-fed one, so a hungry evil desire is more dangerous, more active than a gratified propensity. A caged animal, smooth and fat, gives little trouble and eventually dies comfortably of old age. An evil propensity gratified at the time and then ignored until the next time it calls will sleep just like a gorged animal, between times, giving little trouble. And in due time it will die out completely, leaving no offspring, if you don't keep life in it by recognition, continually thinking about it. And let me tell you that every thought of regret and self-censorship keeps it alive much longer. Every moment you spend groping through the shadows of old sins postpones the hour of your freedom. Learn to satisfy your evil desires, forgive yourself, forget, and set your mind on things above. It is setting your mind on things above that will finally redeem you from all evil conscience, within and without. The recognition of the good will transform you, and nothing else can do it. There is only one important thing in life: to think good. The idea of good is the Savior, the Christ, the Redeemer. We grow as that which we think about. When the idea of good comes to us, we grow up to be like Him, the idea of good, because we see Him as He is. Gratifying desire, good or bad, is the quickest way to free the power of thought for the projection of higher desires. Keep in mind the saving truth that desire is good, and free yourself as quickly as you can from following desire. Chapter 12. Desire crucified will resurrect. Please explain to me the meaning of your words. The crucifixion of desire is good. Now, the mental scientists are teaching me that our desires are all good, but possibly require modification. Our desires are all good, just as the human race is all good, and just as some of the human race suppress, oppress, crucify others of the human race, so some of our desires suppress and crucify others. In both cases, the conservative crucifies the radical. The radical is always expansionist, the conservative anti. The radical, unrestrained, would expand so fast that all resemblance to the original would disappear and chaos would ensue. The conservative would keep things as they are forever. All growth in plants, animals, men, or social organizations occurs by a process. Radical or active life pushes through the weak points of conservative or negative life. Sprouts do not come out of the solid bark of a tree. The resistance is too great. But that same life force, repressed within the bark, keeps pushing upward until it finds an outlet, a place to express itself. Imagine, if you can, that same tree without bark or fiber. The life force would spread out in all directions, growing only an unsightly and untidy excrescence instead of a beautiful and orderly tree. All through the autumn and winter, the tree is peacefully possessed by the conservative element. In the spring, the radical element rises, seething with new ideas. The conservative element strives to maintain its consecrated forms. All the new life given to it by the rising radical element only serves to enlarge and add to the old form. The radical is not satisfied with the old and pushes, expands, forces, increases until, between growth from within and pressure from without, it rises to the top, finds the weak points of the conservative armor, and pushes into new expression. Not only is there room at the top, but all freedom is at the top. Below the top, all is effort and tension. The conservative element in all life, the element that restricts, represses, and crucifies, forces life into higher channels, ever closer to freedom. Do you understand why the crucifixion of desire is good? Desire is to man what sap is to the tree. If it were given free course close to the earth, it would never express itself beyond the dustworm stage. The environment forces desire to go through higher channels. Self-repression forces it still higher. But in the end, all this force, repression, and crucifixion leads to freedom of expression. Today is the day of freedom. New shoots are now sprouting from every weak place in the old conservative shell. The day of repression and force has passed. We are free. That is why we say desire is good, trust in desire. And we also say the crucifixion of desire is good, because with it, desire is resurrected. And again we exclaim, all is good. Desire is the only infallible guide. Whoever wishes to crucify desire, let him crucify it. Gradually, desire will rise above the point of crucifixion and express itself in freedom. Chapter 13. How to desire. How can a person discover what he really desires? It may be that I am what someone calls a wooden woman, or that I have crushed desire until I have made it too weak to express itself. But I know this: I am not satisfied with what I do. I have never cared for the work, but had to do it as best I could do it. I want something else. I have this feeling of longing and searching, hoping for something all the time, but I don't know what I want. And when I look at the field of women's work and also men's, I don't see any work that I really want to be involved in. When I was a very little girl and went to Sunday school, I used to think that being a missionary was the best thing on earth. It may have been because of the stories of the wonderful things in tropical countries that I wanted to see, but it could have been something else. When I got older, my great desire was to be a doctor, and I started studying. But the opposition was so great that I became disgusted, not with the work, but with the people, and I got as far away from them as I could. Once or twice since then, I have made an effort to take up the study again, but I never did. It's the only thing I've ever really wanted to do. Everything else has been a sort of chance, as it was the means of taking me somewhere new, for I don't like to stay long in one place. Desire is a real, all-powerful force. To be effective, a force must be concentrated, focused. In childhood, desire is concentrated. This one thing, with all my soul, is the mental attitude and desire of the child. A child follows its desire until it is satisfied. Then it turns all its desire, its force, in a new direction. It is not the same with adults. They allow all kinds of things, internal and external, to divert their desire, just as He allowed opposition to divert it. A part of her force, of her thought, of her desire, kept flowing in the old direction, and another part was diverted in a new direction. Soon his force, desire, was again diverted and divided. Again and again this operation is repeated, until she is like a great stream which becomes 1,000 little channels, running in all directions on a dead level, instead of being one powerful and unresisting stream. This is the state of the 9/10 of the race. The desire in each is diverted into 1,000 little impotent desires. Life meanders aimlessly on a great dead level, but all the original force is there. All it needs is direction to concentrate it again and turn it into a mighty power, the current of which carries the individual easily, delightfully, in the desired direction. When a soul awakens on such a dead level as this, when it finds itself without an object in life, or a desire worthy of the name, the first thing to do is to do nothing. Be still, let yourself go, make yourself comfortable, get plenty of sleep, sit in the sun and relax, as a hen does in the dust. Let life live you. Gradually, you will become aware of a desire that seems to be a little stronger and bigger than any other desire, as if 2 or 3 of those little rivulets of desire have come together. That is what has happened. Now look for that desire. Follow in its footsteps to satisfy it. Go with it as long as you can. But don't worry if it soon looks like a dead level again. Go back to silence. Sleep some more. Bask in the sun. After a while, you will feel another desire. Desires are little rivulets of desire, and this time it will be a little stronger than before. Get up quickly and run with it. A few more little rivulets have run together. Repeat this little alternative act of running again as the desire, the feeling, asks you to. Take it easy, my dear. You have all eternity ahead of you. One of these beautiful mornings you will wake up with a real and living desire. While you were resting and sleeping, many of those little wish rivulets came together and formed a nice and respectable wish. But don't change tactics. Be careful not to expend too much energy. Just let yourself be carried away by the desire. Go slow when it goes slow. Be calm and gentle. Desire does the work. Let it. Stay in the middle of the flow and it will carry you safely. Every so often you will find yourself giving a little extra push in the desired direction. That is caused by another desire rivulet running in the current of desire. One at a time, all the little rivulets will run, and you will find yourself being carried swiftly, happily, and effortlessly in the desired direction. Desire did it all. One little rivulet, bigger than the others, wanted an object in life, so it flowed in that direction and attracted all the other little rivulets. It did not dominate the other rivulets, as so many people try to force desire and thought. This little desire ran quietly, humming its own little song and minding strictly its own business. And gradually, one by one, all the other little rivulets fell in love with its song and came closer and closer. And finally they all ran in one bed, all in one direction, all with one purpose. That's how you have to concentrate, and it's as easy as rolling down a log. When I was very little, I used to play on the beach of a river where a little stream flowed into the river, and I would make little channels and spread that stream out. Then I would run my finger or a stick from one stream to another and put them back together. It was a lot of fun, but not as much fun as it is now to push the little streams of thought, the streams of desire, into new brain channels, bringing them closer and closer together every day. Concentration is a lot of fun when you know how to do it, and the way to learn is to practice, practice, practice. Concentrate on the points of least resistance. Be loud with you, but keep doing it. And don't be frightened for a moment by the result. The strength is there, and you have all eternity to do it, and you don't have to do it anyway if you don't want to. Do what you want, darling. Chapter 14. How to Follow Desire. I should very much like to have an interpretation of your philosophy of desire, applied to the case of a girl in love with one whom it is not lawful for her to love, that is to say, a man already married. The man argues that there is nothing wrong with such a relationship, as long as no harm is done to anyone else, that their mutual love is just the operation of the law of affinity, and no more sinful than the operation of the law of gravitation. At first, she tried to point out the great sin they were both committing against all human and divine laws, but she says that their love was so great that it carried her beyond all reason, that she will nevertheless admit that she is sane and logical. Do you think they are committing a real sin by their mutual declarations of affection? Or do you believe in any real sin? Sometimes no, and sometimes yes. I'm mixed. Please tell me what you think right away. Jane. No matter how much one is in love with another person, if he has real love for truth and honesty and self-respect, he will not enter into illicit relationships. Assuming he has little love for truth and honesty, he should love the woman too much to rob her of her own honesty and reputation. Sin is to hit the target of righteousness with the law of one's own being. Of course, I believe in sin, in missing the mark, and I believe that we gain wisdom with experience, even if we miss the mark many times. The greatest sin in these cases is the sin against oneself. The law of being is love, and to live, love must express itself honestly. How can love express itself honestly under dishonest mental conditions? When it has to sneak into dark corners to express itself, love soon dies and contempt fester in its place. This is shown by the stories of all illicit love affairs that are allowed to run their course. Love only grows in an atmosphere of honesty, Backed into a corner, it soon dies. Love grows from what it feeds on. So how can it continue to live when it feeds on the poison of deceit and betrayal of others and one's own conscience? Just yesterday I received a letter from a heartbroken actress whose lover's love has grown cold and died. How can things end any other way? Honesty is natural. Dishonesty is unnatural. The illicit lover must hug dark corners and slip in and out. He must lie, crouch, hide, and pretend to satisfy his love. He must live in a tense and unnatural mental and even physical attitude. He becomes twisted and deformed, mentally and physically, and the tension affects him exactly as any physical tension affects anyone. In the end, he realizes that the game is not worth playing. His ardor cools, he becomes critical. About the time he wakes up, the woman wakes up too. He realizes that it is better to be honest with the world and with himself than to hide and crouch for a love. He discovers that the world offers other loves and that he has another or can marry one whom to love in the light of day. He wakes up to the fact that the world turns its back on him. She has nothing left but this love. She has thrown away all other loves for this one. She has thrown away the love of the world for her. She has thrown away the love of her family for her. She has hidden herself from all other loves to cultivate this one, and this one is slipping away from her. She is also mentally a stunted thing, distorted by living the dishonest, crouching, lying, small life of underhanded love. He followed his desire for a woman, and to do so, crushed his desire to be a free, manly man. From experience, he has learned that he followed the lesser love. He concludes that if he had it to do over again, he would express himself honestly. He would gratify the loves to which he need not stoop. He concludes that he could have loved better if he had loved honor more. He has learned his lesson. He is willing to get rid of the woman and turn to his wife, whom he now feels he could have loved more if he had not been so busy with clandestine love. He begins to see his wife with new eyes. The relief of not having to lie and sneak around is great. His wife wins him back. Or his may be the story attributed by some to Nan Patterson and Caesar. He may have decided to return home in search of honest love, or at least friendship, and at the last moment find himself the victim of a desperate woman whose character he has helped to dwarf and distort, and whose reputation he has helped to lose. She may be desperate enough to kill him, and perhaps to commit suicide. He has followed his desire for a woman until he awakened to his deepest desire for an honest life. Just at the moment when he is ready to part with the lesser desire for the greater, he dies. He was badly entangled by illicit love, entangled by circumstances, and by his own distorted character. Perhaps if he had lived, he would have found the tangle too much for him. He would have fallen often, much to his own chagrin. But he dies, with the strong desire for truth and an honest life. Where does he go? I wonder if he is not reincarnated somewhere. I wonder if he does not become a little child again, freed from the old habits of mind and circumstance, plastic to be molded by that new strong desire for an honest life. And the poor girl has also learned her lesson, or she will learn it by repeating the same kind of experience. She too has grown a desire to live honestly. She longs for her own respect and that of the world of which she is a part, to which she is bound by invisible nerves and arteries that she has been trying to ignore. Perhaps she learns her lesson before it is too late, before her character has become too deformed, before hope and faith in the future have died within her. If so, he reforms literally. He begins to reform his character by honest desire, thinking and living, and makes himself a new and honorable place in the world. It is never too late to do this as long as faith and patience are alive. But if she has no patience and little faith, with sufficient courage, she follows Caesar by her own hand. Then she too can reincarnate somewhere, driven by her newborn desire to live right. If the reincarnation is true, the force of attraction, which is desire, will lead the newly reincarnated being towards parents who can offer her conditions to develop according to her dominant desire. This would lead the deed Caesars and Nan Patterson to new states of correct kinship and formation. Do you see how desire works? Listen, if you stoop to follow a desire, you acquire wisdom by the hard and bitter experience that awakens you to the high desire to truly live, which is the principle of every human soul. If you follow the high desire to live righteously before God and man, you miss the bitter experiences of life. Reflect well on these two statements, dear heart. Years of separation from the loved one? But that is sweet pain, not bitter. Have you not yet learned the difference between the bitter penalties of the transgressor against himself, whose desired things are torn from him, and the sweet pain of him who willingly gives up a joy in order to satisfy his high conscience, to walk in freedom, upright before thy God-self, adds sweetness to any destiny? And what is a life of separation from your mate, with that sweet love within and the sunlight upon you, when there is an eternity ahead? The law of affinity, like the law of gravitation with which it is one, is impeccable. But man can use or abuse both. How did Caesar and Nan use it? Because by the law of gravitation, a falling body is attracted to the earth. Is a man excused for pushing his rival over a precipice? Nor is a man excused for pushing himself or a girl from the solid rock of consciousness into the stream of affinity. Nor is a woman excused for courting the edge of the precipice until a misstep, or her own downward glance, or a little push, brings her to the other side. The kindness of gravitation or affinity will not prevent her from crashing against the rocks at the bottom, and the moment she hits, she will wish she had not taken moonlight walks on the edge of a precipice with a man too willing to push her. Follow desire, but observe this rule. Follow only the desire that can be courted in the light of consciousness. Walk upright, like a god. Use reason, but do not use it to silence conscience in order to follow a desire that must be gratified on the sly. Blessed is the man who doubts not what he allows, and indeed, there will be no bitterness in his heart. Life is a complexity of desires. Follow the one that conscience calls the highest. Thus you will lead the simple life of truth, and grow in wisdom whose ways are pleasant and all its paths peace. Children, free love is a beautiful theory that angels can practice with impunity. But so far we are only angels in a larval state. Let us not be too hasty to imitate our elders, lest we do so clumsily and reap broken hearts and the bitterness of regret. We are growing. Let us hasten on, little by little. But a lifetime apart from your affinity. Such things happened in Abelard's time, when people were married for life to the church, or in George Eliot's time, when divorce was unknown because everyone was against such separations. There may have been some excuse for George Eliot and Lewis to defy the respect the world had for them, but even George Eliot was not big enough, strong enough to do so without paying a bitter price. And today it is different. An unhappy marriage will naturally disintegrate in time. Then death or divorce will release the mode that is now in vogue. Watch a rocket go down and you will get an idea of the primitive mode of motion. Remember that in those times, millennia, there was neither up nor down, that these spiral vibratory motions, infinitely minute, came from all directions, in a space where there were no directions, and collided with each other in the most disorderly manner, and you will get a fair idea of the chaos that reigned before there was a sun. Now imagine a bunch of these spiraling, vibrating waves of energy in their funny dalliances, crashing into each other, in a center. Is it any wonder that they are all in the same place? Is it any wonder that sparks would fly, that the collision would make light? All those powerful little spirals, arriving with the speed of thought from all directions, meet at the center of the sun. There they are concentrated. They flow constantly towards that center in one mode of motion. They collide with each other there, are changed by contact and rush back into other modes of motion, which we know as solar rays. In turn, these solar rays rush towards other centers, are concentrated in the crystal, the plant, the animal or the human being, and are again sent off in other modes of motion. Think of how sound waves are created, and you will get an idea of how this powerful concentration of energy produces light and heat by contact with itself. Clap your hands, and you will create a movement that the eardrum registers as sound. So the meeting of these streams of energy sets in motion the energy we recognize as light and heat. This is how the sun is made. I'm not alarmed that the fuel will run out, nor am I afraid that it will be too hot to live there if one day I should happen to emigrate. Have I demanded too much of your imagination, my dear? You will never realize the mysteries of creation if you are not able to imagine much. Imagination is the creative faculty and the only one that can glimpse the mysteries of life. Man is the most powerful concentrator of energy in this world. He does not have to learn to concentrate. It is the result of centuries of energy concentration. His growth is the result of further concentration. He could not be anything but a concentrator if he tried, and he could not stop concentrating to save his life. Or rather, as soon as he stops concentrating, he loses his life. It is natural for man to concentrate his mind. It is not natural for his mind to wander. This is shown by the fact that a small child evinces perfect concentration, while the aged are most afflicted by a wandering mind. Did you ever notice how absorbed a child is in anything that interests him? This is what I am doing. That is his mental attitude. That is concentration. The first seeds of a wandering mind are sown in the child by forcing him to work against his will. A parent or teacher who has the ability to arouse interest in a child is working with the law of his being. The child will easily concentrate knowledge because his attention remains fixed in one direction, whereas the child who works without interest, attention, concentration is dividing his interest between his homework and something he wants to do. Over time, this habit becomes fixed. The mind always wanders, and eventually nothing fully interests. When the mind wanders, the body follows, because the two are one. You often hear people say, "Nothing seems to interest me," all because, without knowing it, the habit of dividing attention has become second nature. Such a person is never happy or healthy, for health and happiness are the result of concentration. Every adult person has contracted to a greater or less extent this unnatural habit of dividing attention, and only to the extent that he indulges the habit will he manifest disease. It is in the power of every man to become like a little child again. And for this, he does not have to cultivate a new habit. He simply remembers the natural conditions. Everything to which man directs his attention is concentrated within himself. The process is similar to that of photography. If his attention is diverted, he only receives impressions below time. If his attention is undivided, his whole attention is directed to any object, thought, or line of thought. He receives a distinct impression. The object or line of thought is concentrated within him. To regain this natural attitude of attention, of interest, is all that is necessary to regain all the other conditions of childhood: health, happiness, beauty, and youthful appearance. Eternal youth is the result of eternal interest in living, the result of continuous concentration. The secret of concentration is interest, attention. If we forget the word concentration and practice interest, we will see that concentration comes naturally. All kinds of concentration practices are good as long as they are interesting. The moment the desire for any particular practice is lost, that practice becomes a detriment, just as compulsory work is a detriment to a child, leading to split attention, to a wandering mind. The idea that there is something wrong with you because you cannot fix your attention, concentrate, for several minutes on a single word, or because you cannot leave your mind blank, is most erroneous. Such mental gymnastics have no earthly or heavenly value. Attention is for receiving impressions and should not be kept fixed for 5 minutes on an idea which should be received in the 10th part of a second. The moment the whole attention is directed to an idea, the impression is clearly received. Every thought and every act of your daily life offers the opportunity to practice concentration. Whenever you remember to do so, give your full attention to what you are doing or thinking. Stop and address yourself. Say, "There is a thing I must do. I want to do it. I am interested in it. I am doing it with all my mind so that it will be perfectly done with the least expenditure of energy." Thus you put your mind, your attention on it, and you gain time instead of wasting it, as you can imagine. Try it thoroughly, and you will be convinced. By daily practice of this kind, you will soon cultivate control of your attention, so that you can direct it where your intelligence asks you to. Then you will discover that you can fix your attention at will on one line of thought. The habit of the wandering mind will leave you. You will enjoy whatever you choose to do. You will find yourself free to follow desire. Chapter 15. Concentration. Without concentration, you can do nothing. Without concentration, nothing was ever done. Without concentration, nothing will ever be done. All the force in the universe is nothing without concentration. Every object in the universe, from an atom to a burning sun, from amoeba to man, exists as a result of concentration. Diffusion is disintegration, death. Concentration is life. The greater the concentration, the more abundant the life. Think for a moment of the sun. It is a good illustration of concentration. Shall I tell you how the sun is made? I saw it made in silence. I do not ask you to believe that I know what I am talking about. Believe or not as you can. Someday, when you enter the silence yourself, you will know whether I am right or wrong, whether you are right or not. I will tell you how the sun was formed, by way of illustration. Let's erase the stars, our solar system included, from the heavens as from a large blackboard. Now look closely, sweetheart, and see what we have left. Space, nothing else. See? Seems easy, doesn't it? But what is space? Space is full, yes, full, of diffused energy, full of motion without mode, or at least without part whose affinity is elsewhere. Release it to the honest expression of love. Chapter 16. Practice. If ye know these things, happy will ye be if ye put them into practice. I receive letters from all directions written by people who say they have studied the new science of life from 1 to nearly a score of years, and yet they have not reached a point where they do not depend upon healers to help them demonstrate over sickness and dissatisfaction. Beloved ones, it does us no good to simply know that mind governs matter. We must take charge of our thoughts and govern our bodies. Very little is gained by knowing that the law of our being is love. We must think love, act love, to free ourselves from disease. It is very nice to theorize about the ideal manifesting itself in the real. But theorizing never saved and never will save a man from unpleasant conditions unless he puts his theories into practical, everyday life. An ideal is omnipotent. I am going to rewrite that sentence. It is worthy of perpetuation in stone. We will perpetuate it in a material more durable than marble, human consciousness. An ideal is omnipotent. An ideal is the only power in your life. But your ideal will do nothing for you if you do not watch over it. It is like some employees, it does not work if it is not watched. But watch your ideal and trust it, and there will be nothing it will not do for you. Beloved, that is why you have not proved anything better. You have watched your conditions more than your ideal. You have set your eye on what you didn't want instead of what you do want, and what you don't want is also a faithful worker when you look at it. Stop looking at it, and it will fall asleep and fall into the bottomless pit of non-recognition. Practice, practice, practice. You can no more learn to think ideally without practice than you can learn to play the piano without practice. Eternal vigilance is the price of freedom from bad habits of all kinds, not eternal fear of forming bad habits. Nothing will bring them to you faster, but eternal vigilance in the practice of good habits of thought. The great secret of healing consists in resolutely closing one's eyes to the manifest and gazing fixedly upon the unmanifested ideal. Only to the extent that one is able to do this will be his success. Practice makes the master in this as in other things. Fix your mind on the ideal. Fix it and fix it again 1,000 times a day if necessary. Eventually the habit will be formed. Your mind will be renewed. Your body will be transformed. As your body is a magnet, your environment will change as your body changes. Whatsoever ye will, it shall be done unto you. Chapter 17. Use your strengths. I treat myself all the time. Can I treat myself too much? MG. You can overdo anything, especially in self-treatment. If you continually repeat affirmations to yourself, your mental chatter interferes with real healing. It is not the conscious mind that heals you. It is the subconscious or soul mind and the superconscious or oversoul. Your soul expression is guided and directed by your conscious mind. A mental affirmation is simply a word of direction to your soul mind. The soul listens to your affirmations and then builds accordingly. But what if you called your maids and told them over and over again what you wanted them to do and how to do it? If you spent all your time repeating your instructions to them, when would they finish the job? And wouldn't they get confused? Of course they would. You don't do it that way. Of course not. not if you are a wise housewife. You call your maids and tell them quietly and kindly, and in as few words as possible, what you want them to do. Then they cheerfully leave your presence and do all they can to please you. If later you find something is not done properly, you call a maid and repeat your instructions, perhaps with some further explanation. Then you walk away again and trust that this time she will get it right. What would happen if you walked behind your maids and tried to watch, criticize and direct every little move? They would get nervous and make silly mistakes, and you would give up in despair. And what if you instructed them to do a difficult job and came back 5 minutes later expecting to find it done? Oh, you can't imagine yourself doing such foolish things. You may not do it to your maids, but you obviously do it to your own self. Your everyday objective consciousness is the mistress or mistress of your being. Psychologists say that objective mental activities are but 1/20th of all your mental activities. That means that the mastermind has the equivalent of at least 20 maids under its direction. These maids belong to the subjective mind or soul of yours. Then there is the great oversoul, of which your individual soul is but an atom whose demand is heard. That means that your little mastermind not only has at its disposal the equivalent of at least 20 subconscious maids, but it also has at its disposal the equivalent of 10 million other helpers of the infinite oversoul. And all the mastermind has to do is say the word. All these helpers fly to do his bidding. You may think that all these helpers don't fly to do your bidding, but they do. The only problem with you is that you don't give your helpers the time and opportunity to carry out your wishes. You repeat your instructions over and over again, and you try to go after your 20 or so maids to see if they do what you want. You watch them in your stomach, in your liver, and in your lungs, always restless for fear that they will go wrong. No wonder you get nervous, restless, and tense all over. No wonder your feelings are no better than they are. Make your declarations of health, happiness, and success at certain regular intervals, say 2 or 3 times a day. Or make them at times when you can't stop thinking about your problems. Do the affirmations clearly and positively. Then take your mind completely away from the subject and give your soul and the Supreme Soul a chance to work. Don't make light of your feelings and go, take an interest in some good work. Take it for granted that your whole being, and moreover all creation, is doing for you the things you desire. Rest easy and trust yourself. Don't let your mind label your feelings and symptoms. Give it plenty of useful work and plenty of play and plenty of rest while your soul works things out for you as fast as it can. Stay as interested and happy as you can while the soul works. Be encouraged to have a good time. Say the word and then be happy, and don't let yourself doubt that the soul will do the work. This is the secret of quick healing. The closer you come to keeping your mind pleasantly occupied between times when you give yourself affirmations and special treatments, the more quickly you will gain health of mind, body, and environment, as well as soul. Your faith in your soul and the Supreme Soul will have made you whole. The unfaithful mind is a terrible meddler and creator of discord, and the idle mind, the mind not directed to useful ends, is always an unfaithful meddler. Moral: be interested in some good work. Chapter 18. Love. The law of man is love. To love is joy. To love always, under all conditions, is eternal life. To refuse to love is to turn the current of life against itself. Result: stagnation, fermentation, death. We call selfish the one who does not love, and we do not feel like loving him. But we must if we want to have eternal life, eternal joy. How to love the one who does not love is a riddle. But even a riddle has a solution. Do you want to know how I solved it? When I discovered that the law of life is love, I tried with all my might to feel love for all people and things. I succeeded wonderfully with the pagans of China, but I could not apply it to the vegetable Chinese and the scrap dealer. I could feel an ocean of love for sinners I had never seen, but when Mrs. Blank told Mrs. Talker, and she told me, that she wished I would choose my hats with better taste, I found it impossible to feel love for Mrs. Blank. I could walk down the street and feel a real thrill of loving compassion for every little stray, but when one trotted with 4 muddy paws up the steps of my freshly scrubbed house, I felt more like beating him than loving him. And I couldn't fool myself into thinking I wanted to beat him because I loved him, as I've heard parents do with their children. I could do some housework in a perfect transfiguration of love, but when I had to clean lamps or the kitchen after the jelly boiled, I would fall from the seventh heaven with a thud. My God, what could I do? I stopped trying to feel love and switched to thinking about love. I said to myself, I choose to love, whether I feel like it or not. I want to send love to everything and everyone, no matter how I feel. I want to love. In this way, I treated myself to love every time I was reminded of it. I thought it silently. I said it out loud in the privacy of my room. I went up to the attic, stomped my feet, clenched my fist and screamed. And I succeeded. Let me whisper something to you. That's the only way to succeed at anything. Of course, the virtue is not in the room or in the attic or in shouting, but in the activity of the will induced by it. Try it. I succeeded in making love a habit of thought. When something becomes a habit of thought, it registers in 95% of the submind, and then we say of it, I feel, affirm, 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 whisper, louder, scream, stomp hard and tap with your shoulder. Success must be conquered, not implored. The man or woman who wants to perpetuate a daylight marriage and a love sab rosa is crooked. Do not trust him. His corruption will manifest itself in other ways as well. A recent major scandal and criminal prosecution in political circles concerns a man who for years and years has been crooked in his love affairs. Living the complex and deceitful life in any direction will eventually distort the most upright character. But crooked love affairs will melt a character off more quickly and surely than anything else I know of, whereas love controlled in honor beautifies and glorifies the mind and body. Blessed is the love of a man for a woman. More blessed still is the renunciation of such love for the sake of truth. All things are lawful, but blessed is the man who willingly renounces that which is not expedient according to the highest love of his own being, the love of truth and liberty. Great is he who, caught in the current of the gulf of some great desire, sucks up the current and reaches his goal. As you conclude your journey through you and your forces, may the insights gleaned from Elizabeth Towne's wisdom continue to resonate within you. Remember, the power to shape your reality lies within your grasp. Embrace it, cultivate it, and let it guide you toward a future filled with boundless potential. Farewell, and may your journey forward be illuminated by the brilliance of your own forces.